when I was put into the sheriff role, I looked at how previous administrations had led, and I said, I don't feel that it was as productive as empowering my employees to do their best. And I remember the day I told them, I said, you are my advisors. I need your input to make good decisions. And it re-empowered them to do their best work. And things really started to strive. I put the right people in the right places and I said, I trust you. Now go.
Welcome to the Unleashing Leaders podcast, where we work with willing leaders to accelerate the changes you seek. We'll learn from the experiences of different leaders facing real challenges and distill practical, purposeful steps to apply in your context. I'm Lee Scott, your curious co-pilot. Together, let's make positive changes for our companies and communities. Welcome back to the Unleashing Leaders podcast. Today, we are joined by Sheriff Matt Clifford of the Ada County Sheriff's Office in the Treasure Valley area of Idaho. They are the largest law enforcement agency in the state of Idaho and provide a lot of support to not only the county, but also many of the cities in the region and other related rural counties. Today, we're going to be talking about two things. How do you intentionally cultivate a culture that allows you to evolve the skills and the attitudes that allow you to then adapt to changing external circumstances with your customers and the community you serve? Sheriff, it is fantastic to have you on our call today.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it greatly.
Well, tell us, first of all, a little bit about your career arc. I mean, when you were a little boy, you said, I want to be an elected official and, can't get money and go to events. What preceded you becoming our amazing sheriff?
Well, I'm a native Idahoan, which isn't always easy to find anymore, but native Idahoan, grew up in North Idaho in a small little rough and tumble mining town, came down to Boise to go to college and got my biology degree from Boise State. And I jumped feet first into law enforcement with that biology degree, doing nothing with it. But
hey, I disagree because I got a biology degree too, but it's the study of humans, man. I mean, like what better degree to go into law enforcement than that, right?
It is true. It is true. But, the sheriff's office, the Ada County Sheriff's Office is the only agency I've ever worked for. I've been here 23 years. I started in the jail, worked a handful of years there, went out to patrol. Bulk of my career was in patrol, doing everything that patrol people do. I ran a dog, I was a trainer, and all those types of things. And then I became a supervisor there, stayed in patrol for about 15 years straight, I think, which is a long time to, look through the windshield of a car for your career. And worked in our court services bureau and promoted from there, got appointed to the chief of police job in Eagle, which is one of our contract cities. So I still work for the sheriff. And then a couple of years later, I found myself in this role all of a sudden. So, it was nothing I was seeking for sure. But at the time, especially, we had some things going on with our agency. The previous sheriff left, and I kind of felt, if nothing else, I owed it to the agency, an agency that I really, really believe in and still do. And the service we provide, I really believe in, and it's the right thing to do to keep it moving forward into the future.
First of all, you said you started in the jail. I just want to be clear. You started working at the jail.
Working, yes. Yeah.
I didn't know if that was like a work to hire type of program.
Yeah. It was, work release program.
But, it's funny because so many leaders that we've met over the years, rarely is it something that they're seeking the position, right? They're seeking the limelight, versus you're seeking to serve. You said 15 years on the inside of a windshield and then time in court services on the other end of that spectrum. And, somebody who seeks to serve, who then naturally elevates and is called to and feels the need to serve in a different capacity. That's that level 5 leadership that you hear about, with some of the great authors. So really, really grateful to see you be that kind of a leader in that role. Well, tell us, over that 23 years, what are some of the things that are going right in the Treasure Valley, which for those who are joining in this is like Boise, Meridian, Eagle, Kuna. It's a bunch of metropolitan areas in this little gem in southwestern Idaho. What are some of the things that are going right from a public safety perspective, from the relationship with the community? What are some things to celebrate?
So there are a couple things, one of which we haven't talked about before, and I'll start with it. And I just kind of came to me was, one of the things that we really have going right here is the relationship with all of our agencies across the whole Treasure Valley. And of course, that extends into Canyon County as well. That really helps us to provide a good product to the community. Your agency heads all get along very, very well. And many of us consider each other friends and have gotten to know each other very well. So we have a level of cooperation in the last couple of years that I've never seen across the valley, which is, because at the line level, yeah, you go to a call, and it doesn't matter if it's Boise PD or Garden City and Ada County, you all kind of overlap a little bit. You help each other out. It's all good. But when it comes to concepts and coordinating for events and things, I mean, we're doing so much better than we have in years past. Now, you couple that with the support that we get from our community, and it's really making, it's really an equation for positive outcome. Here in this part of the country, in Idaho specifically, we have so much support from our community that it really kind of allows us to do our jobs in a positive manner, talking to people that come from other states where the community doesn't care for them, their agencies don't back them. What that does is it causes you to, like we've talked about before, it causes you to kind of turtle up and, well, I will wait until something happens. God forbid I'm proactive and find something, and now I'm in trouble because somebody didn't like it.
Yeah, it's those perverse incentives that, hey, we punish you for seeking to serve and to contribute in ways, and if you didn't dot every I, or even just the perception of it, versus then folks are like, but you're rewarded for not getting in trouble. And that creates mediocrity in any business, right? But you guys, I mean, there's a personal jeopardy component, to the line of work that you do. And it's hard.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you have personal jeopardy in the form of, physical harm. We all have psychological harm. I always tell my mom, like, I'm kind of damaged goods a little bit. I'm okay though. I'm seeing somebody, but then there's also if I do the wrong thing, I could be prosecuted for a crime. I mean, if you're working at the toothpaste factory making toothpaste caps, that's probably not going to happen. So there are a lot of things out there that weigh heavy on your mind, the decisions you have to make very quickly, whether you're a line level deputy or the sheriff. When you wear a badge and a uniform, you're a leader in the community, period. That's a lot of weight on people that are really trying to do the right thing and do a good job. But again, the community sure helps us accept some of that responsibility by saying, hey, we believe in you. We trust you. And we do like the service that you bring forward.
And that doesn't mean we're always perfect, right? I think that's what you guys always say too. It's like, hey, we acknowledge that we are going to make mistakes. The difference is we own it when it happens and we get that stuff cleaned up fast.
Yeah, you have to couple that with these people also expect a lot out of us, and they should, right? I don't think I could say that, well, I mean, the public just shouldn't expect much out of us. I mean, that's just not what this job is. And that expectation is that you're well trained, that you are well equipped, and that when you mess up, we turn and say, yeah, we messed up. We're going to really try not to ever do that again. We did A, B, and C to try and mitigate that. So, and I think we do that here. I think that's how we've gained the public's trust and been able to just really give a good product to the whole valley.
And that's a virtuous cycle, right? Like you do the right thing, that earns a little trust. That allows you to do more of the right thing. Okay, that earns more trust. And then there are inevitable glitches and oopses, and those can have really serious consequences. And so you take that seriously and you get on it, and then that keeps it going. And now I think that's one of the reasons, we're able to enjoy, like you said, when you say a product, tell us, like, what are some of the key indicators of that successful product? Macro crime, domestic things, those all are trending way below the averages of any other city of our size.
Yeah.
That's the product, right? And that's what people want.
Correct. I think law enforcement is a piece of that really great crime rate that we have here, but I'll explain how it acts in a strange way in a minute. But, you can't say, well, because all the crimes are low, that's law enforcement's. That's all us. No, it's a lot about the community, but
the ecosystem.
Correct. And let's say you remove the ecosystem of law enforcement, it messes all of that balance up, and then you're going to see more crime. But there are other pieces of that, right? There are the part of the ecosystem that are good, hardworking people that live here with good values. There are businesses that support each other and support the community, all of those things. But, you know, public safety is one of the biggest things that people focus on because, it's not just, well, how much crime is there, but we don't want people walking around having the fear of crime either, right? That's kind of one of the freedoms we really enjoy right here. There's not a lot of fear of crime because we're out doing our jobs and being very proactive and all those things in the ecosystem. Now, one of the things I love to point this out. So one of the things that that didn't go down around here is what we call crimes against society. So we'll see some property crimes, violent crimes, those are going down, but crimes against society are going up. So those are like prostitution, vice, drugs, mostly drugs, uh, because those are usually nabbed from proactive police officers. So I can make that statistic go down. I'll just tell deputies don't do anything, and that it will go down. But when you see the crimes against society go up, that's usually almost entirely comes from the form of a proactive agency that's out there. Hey, you know what? We while we have time, we are on the clock, and the public expects us to do something. Let's go find something to do. And finding drugs, coming through our communities or being sold in our communities. So that statistic usually is influenced by law enforcement.
Okay. So in that sense, it's kind of like a leading indicator then where you're like, look, it always is there. If you see that number goes up, it means we're putting more effort into being proactive about that. So it doesn't turn into more things. It's unintuitive in that sense, right? You're like, well, I want that to be lower. It's like, well, the way I can make that be lower is like, we don't focus on it. And that's the difference between crime versus reported crime, right? Those are two very different numbers.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot of statistics to show the less, police officers you have in your community and the less that they're doing, the more, especially your property crimes and things will go up, and even your violent crimes, because if you have police out doing proactive policing, even if it's just, hey, we're stopping tons of people and we're being seen, statistically, your property crimes and violent crimes go down because people, in the back of their mind realize, I saw a cop like 2 blocks over, and I'm not, I'm not going to do that. So, I mean, there's all kinds of things that influence statistics, but those are some of a couple of things that we can try and hang our hats on.
Let's talk now a little bit about some of the challenges that are starting to emerge, and then we'll flow into how are you intentionally developing the internal culture to respond to that. But frame it up for us. What are some of the emerging external challenges that you are seeing that are impacting this community, in many other communities across the country?
Sure. Well, I mean, the obvious one is growth, right? I mean, you can't get around it here. Growth, growth, growth. Even in times where it says, well, we're not in an economic uptick, people are still moving here.
And that's in part because of the public safety, right? So again, all these feedback loops, right? But then more growth, more bodies comes with more of a broader basket of humans that are living.
Correct.
Yep.
So one of the challenges of that is even though we do have a low crime rate historically here, we still have a low crime rate, but the mathematical equation of, well, if you add 100,000 people, but you still have the same crime rate, you still have more people committing the crimes within that rate. So it's numbers. So that's something we have to kind of deal with to manage a little more. Calls can get more complicated with more people that live in an area, which means more times on call, more time spent on calls. So that's one of the things that we kind of run into is there's just more of it. Another thing that comes with it is a cultural change in the community. When you have people that move here from other states, Idaho has a very kind of specific culture. Sometimes people move here, and even though they have kind of the same ideals that you do, the culture doesn't always lend itself to, yeah, but we don't do that here. This is I'll tell this little story because I realized it years ago. But we had a gentleman that used to work here. And this is a bit before the huge rush into Idaho. It was kind of a trickle.
Early waves. Yeah.
Yeah. It was the early wave. And he was riding with me in my car. He was one of our tech guys that made sure the mapping system worked right in the computer in the car. So he would ride with me all the time. And I remember kind of my aha moment things are different in other states or just culturally. because he was a great guy. But he said, yeah, I put up all my Christmas lights and I put them all. I have this huge, he talks about this huge display of his Christmas lights. And he said, but the guy next door only put up a couple and he was offended by that. So I went next door and I knocked on his door and asked him why he didn't put up as many Christmas lights. And he said, he just stared at me. And I thought, yeah, because he doesn't want you to bother him about Christmas lights. I mean, Idahoans are just, they're proud of what they have. And, they don't want you to come and tell them that you should be doing this. So good people, but there is still a culture clash that comes from, states all surrounding us that are kind of pouring into Idaho.
The different subtle expectations, right? And then and we're going to come back to that because with those different expectations, when you go on a call, and this is true in any business, the idea of thinking of your customer base as this, homogeneous, monolithic, everybody's exactly the same. Like that's not true for any business, whether you're in healthcare or education or law enforcement or retail, you have different customers. So, but let's zoom internally first for a moment because, you have a great perspective on the internal culture and, having had a chance to work with you guys directly, you absolutely do have a fantastic, culture there. But let's start first with saying, where does that come from? Is the sheriff the one that is the cultural czar and deems how everything should be and it's your will or the highway? Is that how it rolls? I mean, you're paramilitary, you're a cop, you're the boss, right? Please tell me you have control over this.
Yeah, well, I would love to say that's exactly how it works. Is I send out a memo, and then that's the culture. So the culture in any police agency, really, it really is controlled by your line staff and your first line supervisors. So those are the people in the trenches doing the work, boots on the ground, whatever cliche you want to call it. They are the ones that are in control of your culture. Now, from a sheriff perspective, I can influence that. I can influence by putting the right people in the right places. I can define it all I want so that I can say, hey, this is what I want it to be. But when it comes down to it, it's going to be your first line supervisors, especially influence the line staff that create the culture of your agency. And again,
That's universal, and that's not even across LE. That is across every entity ever.
sure.
So, but you really characterize that well. That it's like the role of the sheriff or the CEO or the director or whatever is to influence it both directly by trying to signal what you want it to be, and also by over time influencing who ends up in those roles. But the actual moment of magic is that frontline supervisor.
Here we struggle with that as other agencies as well in the Valley for the same reasons that with some of the things that we encounter out in the public. We bring a lot of lateral officers here from mostly the West Coast, California, Oregon, Washington, that have very different police cultures than we have here in the Valley. And it's not always, they're not bad. They're actually good cops and good people, but it takes a little bit to them to understand it. Like, yeah, no, we do that here. We'll go and try and find your stolen barbecue. Like that's what we'll do that here because where they're from, they may not have the ability to even look into it, or maybe, hey, I'm going to a knife fight in 2 minutes, so I don't care about that. Or maybe their department has that culture of like, yeah, well, I just take reports. I don't do anything because of the way I'm treated. So here, we've had officers come and then everybody around them says that they're lazy. And then we realize they don't really know what to do when there's not a call coming out. Because we have time where we can go and do like free time, I guess I would say. It's not really free, but where they go and do proactive policing. And sometimes they're just not used to it. They're not used to how we interact with the public a lot of times because how they interacted with the public where they were was very different, contentious. I've had guys in my car years ago that I don't understand why people are waving at us. And I tell them, wave back, wave back. They're waving at us because they like us and they can't grasp it. So sometimes they have a hard time kind of accepting that. And then, sometimes just have a hard time accepting the way we do things. And that's normal if you come from another agency in Idaho or even, hey, we just do things different procedurally here. We need you to kind of hop on board, integrate with it, and then bring us your good ideas and help us improve ourselves. But don't step foot here and say, here's what you need to do. Because with Idahoans, again, you're probably not going to get as far, but you come in here, get the lay of the land, do the work, and say, all right, I got an idea.
And that's, the idea of being a disruptor is getting a lot of traction, a lot of industries. But what folks forget is that before you get to have the right to be a disruptor, there's a period of humility and curiosity that precedes that builds the rapport that says, I will honor you and I'll honor what is going right. Now I've earned the respect, to be able to say, and here's where we might want to go next. All right. But if you show up day one trying to be a disruptor, then day two is going to be real short for you. And that's just the reality, right? Like, we see in the media how it's glorified, but that doesn't tell the story of the years it took of them building relationships and bridges to then have the privilege of providing that challenge. Well, tell us a little bit more, Sheriff Clifford, if you could. You talk about your culture and you talk about what it is. Like, how would you define it for somebody from the outside looking in? Like, the culture has evolved over time, and you've really emphasized this service orientation. Like, we will be proactive. You're dropping the hints, but give us a picture of the desired internal culture in your agency is fill in the blanks.
The easy way out is to say, well, it's our mission, vision, values, but that's not what it is. I think our culture is the way we deliver our mission, vision, and values, right? It's the way that we create that product with the public and say, you know what, we know we're here in a service-based industry. We are going to provide you service, and we're going to try and problem solve for you as best we can. And I also say there are two parts to that. There's also an internal part of that too. Hey, we are going to empower our employees, equip our employees, and train them so that we can treat each other internally with that same, that same attitude of, hey, let's help each other out, so we're stronger as an agency to help the public. So I think that's what it is. Just hey, we have the ability to help you solve problems, and we're going to do it for you. And we treat people right. I mean, that's a oversimplification and, kind of my redneck answer. Like, we treat people right, but we do. We know that people, they want to be treated, like I would say, well, we hire humans and not robots. And we want you to treat people like you live in their community, even if you don't.
And that's, now you're talking about customer service and a service orientation. And, but you're talking about doing that where your customer might be an inmate in the jail, right? Your customer might be somebody that is, going to trial and, is a witness, or maybe they're the ones, who are the defendant, so you're talking about folks who have ostensibly, they're interfacing with you because of bad things that have happened, or maybe bad things that they've done. And I think sometimes folks think when you talk about service and contribution and respect, you start to talk about like, well, then that means the customer is always right and the customer gets to do whatever they want. And it's like, no, you might be talking about a customer that you've got in handcuffs, right? Or is getting ready to stand trial, or is in the jail. Like, but they're still customers. And that doesn't mean they're always right, but it does mean that, hey, I get to show up and say like, hey, you've done what you've done. I respect that. I'm going to treat you with respect as a human being that you deserve. And that doesn't mean the boundaries go out the window, but it means that how I show up when I'm honoring those boundaries is done with a certain attitude. And that's a nuance that I think a lot of folks are really struggling with. They're like, well, how can I treat them how can I treat them as a customer when I'm the regulator, or I'm or inherently adversarial? And yet here you are in probably the most adversarial type of customer interaction sometimes. And yet you're still showing up to say, hey, how do we do that? And that's not always easy.
Yeah. I'm really glad you brought that up, because when I talk to our academies about, the way we do business and how we serve people, well, we do a dual academy. We run the detention academy with our patrol academy. So some of those folks are slotted to go into the jail to work. So I have to kind of explain just what you did. Your community is inside the walls of the jail. Now, you're still serving the community outside the jail by keeping those folks inside the walls and the facility safe, but you still have a portion of the population that you have to serve inside the walls to say, all right, this person has a problem. How can I help them with their problem? Treat them with respect and dignity. All of the things that you just said. It's an amazing point, because you're right. You may have to fight people in there, and you may have to break up fights, or the most intense communication skills there are. I always tell people, here's an example of how, if you're in a dorm with 100 people, well, you're a deputy, and you're locked inside that dorm with 100 people and you don't have a key to the door. And so, and that's how it's run. And it's called direct supervision. I tell them, you're the mayor of the town. You have to get the townspeople to go along with the program. And by the way, nobody wants to live in this town, right? And the town comes with a lot more rules than a regular town. So you've got to figure out how you get people to go with the program. And the way to do that is to help them solve their problems, treat them with respect, and make sure they understand what the boundaries are. And it works very well for us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it requires a lot less positioning and posturing and frankly force. You create that kind of relationship with your townspeople, right? Because at any point in time, if they all decide they don't want you to be the mayor no more,
Yes.
they're not going to be the mayor for very long.
That's right. You don't want to be in that position.
So one of the things I've heard you say, Sheriff Clifford, is that you're right. You may not always be able to meet a customer's expectation. It just may not be viable, right? It's like, you're not going to be able to do it, or you can't do it, or you just won't do it. And yet in that moment, that's still an opportunity to educate and provide a meaningful experience. What does that mean, in a practical sense when you guys are interacting with sometimes a public that's not going to get what they want?
Yeah. And I think that kind of goes alongside with your customer might not always be right, but let's help them understand why in a respectful manner, right? So it is an opportunity for education. Every police contact is an opportunity for education, whether it's negative or positive, whether you're getting a ticket or helping an old lady across the street, whatever. Every one of them has an opportunity for a piece of education, a positive contact. So I think that kind of goes along with our culture of, okay, you encounter people that say, I want you to do this. And well, we're not going to do that. Instead of responding tough, we're not doing that. It's easier to say, well, we can't do that because of X, Y, and Z. What we can do is X, Y, or Z. Probably 95, 97% of officer complaints are people that don't have enough information. When I was a supervisor, you're the first line that the officer complaints come to, and they almost never go anywhere else because you explain to the person, oh, this is why, this is how, this is the reason that maybe the deputy failed to do, but you end up at least, buttoning it up by giving them that extra information. And most of the time they're like, oh, I didn't realize that's how that is, or I didn't realize that's what he was doing. And, to go along with that, one of the things we always preach is you need to treat every interaction like it's the only interaction they're ever going to have with the police, because most people have 1 to 2 interactions, maybe 0. And then you think about the one interaction they ever had with the police, it's going to be with them the rest of their life. And that's what they will base their perception of law enforcement on. And especially nowadays, you have all these secondary and tertiary interactions of, no, I'm going to tell my nephew, I'm going to tell my neighbor, I'm going to put it on, Facebook, and it goes out to the world. So we try and kind of bring that into the culture of when you interact with people, that's part of solving their problem is giving them information on this is what we can do, what we can't do, what we will do, what we won't do, and just making it meaningful.
Well, and you said earlier this notion like, people want human cops. They don't want RoboCop, which means that the standard you're painting right now, it's a beautiful standard. I think it's what, any community would want from their law enforcement relationships. And we're human cops. So we are all going to have days where we're not able to achieve that standard. And, you had a great example where you were there yourself one point. And so what does it look like when that breaks down? And how does the network, how does the culture around that officer or that deputy, or even that admin person, right, who's having, that bad moment? Tell us about that particular story where you're going from one call that's one level of just not right in the world to another call. And you're like, I wasn't able to pivot quickly, but you had a partner that stepped in.
Yeah, and that's that human piece of it, that not robot. We all have emotions, we all have weaknesses, but it is the network of your coworkers and your supervisors and that the culture that we ingrain into people of, hey, you have to take care of each other as well, right? And that's that internal part of our culture is watch out for each other. That doesn't mean, you hide things from supervisors. It means, no, You help each other do the right thing. And the situation you're talking about is a prime example. It was when Boise police officer Kevin Holtree, he was shot and paralyzed years ago. I just saw him today, just about an hour ago. And I'd known Kevin my whole career. And we'd been trying to help Boise field their calls and monitor things. It was a very, very tense time for the whole county. And we held a lot of calls that were, I don't say in lesser importance, but we had to prioritize things, right? And one of those calls that got prioritized towards the bottom was a dog problem out in this South Ada County. And the dog was at the owner's house. No one was getting eaten by a dog. The dog was at the owner's house now, and dog had chased my wife, that kind of thing. The homeowner, the calling party, made some statements about if you're not going to come out here because it's been an hour, I'm going to get a gun and go shoot the dog. Okay, well, now it's escalated. It's prioritized higher. We go out there, and he's upset. He's mad because, hey, why did you get here earlier? And I was emotionally drained from, this person who I've known for, many years is shot. We didn't know if he was paralyzed at the time, but he is in bad shape. And these things are all going on very emotionally. I'm not in the emotional state to deal with this gentleman's dog problem. And he's complaining because we didn't get there in time. And I didn't say anything inappropriate, but I was getting angry, and, the tone of my voice and some of the things I did say, but I was a supervisor at the time, and the two deputies that were with me recognized that and say, well, we need to help Sarge out right now. And, I think if you're a good supervisor, you need to empower your employees to recognize that when it's the right thing to do something, even if it's something where they have to step between you and someone else, or you and something else. Deputy stepped between me and the calling party and said, Sarge, I think you should probably go over to your car and hang out. And that's probably a great idea. So yeah, that's the not robot part. Everybody's got emotions and weaknesses, and it feels good to be at an agency where people can recognize and say, oh, this guy's having a bad time right now. So let's do something to help him and the community all at the same time.
But that takes tremendous courage, especially when you're doing it, up to your sarge, your supervisor, or maybe that's somebody that's got way more seniority than you do. And you're watching it happening and you're like, I don't think this is right, but I'm not sure it's my place to intervene. And, when you've got a culture of service, and it's service externally, it's service internally, it's service peer to peer, it's service up and down, like that allows for a lot of better things to happen. That's going to be essential, because if you have that kind of internal culture that you're cultivating, and again, that takes deliberate effort and reinforcement, then that allows you, then let's go external now for a moment to say, how do you adapt to different customer expectations? We say the Treasure Valley, but again, you've got very deep rural farming, ag communities. You have deep metropolitan, in the rough parts of town communities. You've got, and everything in between. You got the suburbanites, and they all have different expectations, and they all assume that you could just read their minds. So tell us about, how do you, when you're going to those moments, and I guess we're kind of focused a little bit on patrol right now, but it could be in court services too, where you got a real high profile case that the whole community is just, the media is like swarming on you. And then you have this other one that's more routine. You got to be able to adjust to those different expectations.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think some of that starts at hiring, where we can hire people that can make those adjustments, and we can identify in them, and you can make those adjustments, because you're right. With a sheriff's office, especially here in Ada County, you might be dealing with a farmer who's mad because his neighbor's stealing his water, which is a real thing. Or you might be at a bank robbery, we also have these unincorporated parts of Ada County that we patrol. They're two vastly different areas, 3 different cities that we contract with, and we still work inside all of the other cities in Ada County. So you're talking about a very diverse, cultures, all types of people you're going to run into, right? And so that is an expectation of our employees, and if we're going to be problem solvers, we do need to be able to step back and see the forest for the trees, right? We need to be able to say, all right, I handled this call in South County. a call just like it 2 weeks ago, but now I'm working overtime in Eagle, and it's not going to be able to be solved the same way. So we kind of pride ourselves on that, of that adaptability of, all right, this is who I'm talking to. I see what the problem is and where they're coming from. Yeah, I think we do a good job of it. I mean, again, you're never going to be 100%, but we try to hire for that, and we try and when we train for that of, hey, you're going to switch gears, and the call in Star is not going to be the same as the call you went to in Boise.
And to try to be prescriptive about that would be exhausting. I mean, take every permutation, every combination, like if you try to protocol it all out, like you'd never get through the script because by the time the call was over. So there's something that you allow to empower those folks to say, read the room, look at the geography, look at the neighborhood, look at the cultural, ethnic biases that might be in there. Like you got to take that all in really, really fast and then say, okay, now I'm able to show up in this way. And, that's challenging to do on the fly. But that's the idea, to treat everybody exactly the same is like the most unfair model in the world, because I feel like everybody wearing a size 6 shoe. It's like, that wouldn't work. You have to show up differently with different people in different situations in order for it to be actually equitable and consistent. And that sounds like a contradiction.
Yeah, and you're right, and you have to, I don't know, you could be standing in someone's living room and you have to realize, all right, I got to take this all in really quickly, where you come in and you have a very little understanding, and then realize, okay, this is what's going on. This is the external factors that are leading to this problem. This is who these folks are and how they probably are going to do, even if you have a kind of a preconceived notion of, these people have a preconceived notion, right? So let's see if we can fix that. It's a great example. Hurricane Katrina was going on. I go in these folks' house, and um, this couple has lived in Idaho. I think they had lived in Idaho for 7 years, and the wife's sister got displaced to Boise area and is living at her home now. The two boys that are cousins don't get along. They have a fight. One ends up at the hospital. Hospital calls up us and says, this kid's got an injury. They're already at home. Okay. Well, we show up to the house, and it gets strange really quickly because, okay, we're just really kind of it seems like, yeah, these two kids had a fight, but we just have to follow up. Well, the people who have lived in Idaho for 7 years are familiar with us and know kind of they've integrated into the culture of living here. Well, the sister that moved here from Louisiana is used to being treated by the police very differently. And it didn't go well with her to start. But instead of lashing out, because she said, well, I'm going to get everybody's badge number and I'm blah, blah. I remember I looked her right in the face and I said, ma'am, I'll give you my business card and I'll put my supervisor's phone number on it. I said, that we're not here like that. This is not Louisiana. And she looked at me quizzically, but I realized this lady is not used to this police culture that we have. She's used to a very different police culture. I kind of got to give that one to her, right?
Yeah. Like you don't get defensive and, bite her head off, because then that's going to
Right.
validate the misperceptions. Yes. Instead, it's like, wait a second, this person's showing up with a different perception. I've got to adjust my light so it goes through her lens the way I want, versus asking her to change her glasses. That requires emotional intelligence. It requires some empathy. It also requires some humility, right? Because you're like, not getting butthurt and defensive in that moment.
With this job, you really do have to realize almost all the time, it's nothing personal. These folks have like someone that treats you poorly and you're not treating them poorly. There's something else going on there, right? It's not that they don't like Matt Clifford. It's that they probably have some kind of experience behind them that has led them to act in this manner. And so a lot of times, if you just figure out what that is when you're with them, you can make it a lot better.
Yeah. Or at least there's something you do to acknowledge it and say like, hey, I get it. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's something we do pretty well, to say, all right, a lot of people are different, and we have different types of households. We have different socioeconomics. We have different religions. We have different age groups. I mean, you name it. And I think we try and get there, assess and go, all right, this is the way we need to try and solve this problem in this place today.
So I want to come back to a question before we wrap this up, Sheriff. So in this conversation, we've been talking about how do you intentionally cultivate this culture to be service oriented How do you do it so that you can situationally read the situation and adapt accordingly? And yet, who taught you how to do this? Did somebody sit down and be like, going, "Hey, this is how it is," right? And then now you got new folks who are coming in. You just got the employee engagement surveys, and you got people asking those questions like, what is the culture? And it's a bit of a contradiction, I think, for some leaders where, and I know myself, I experienced this where I'm like, man, nobody told me this stuff. Like, I just figured it out. Why should I have to explain it in concrete terms to you? Right? It's like, and yet they're different too. So tell us about that pattern and how's that showing up for you? And how do you give yourself the pause to say, okay, I get it. Nobody told me, but yeah, I do need to tell you.
I was a little, we did have our employee engagement survey. And it was I was a little taken aback to somebody who kind of lives and breathes the culture of the agency, and I've loved to come up through it and see it improve. Cause you're right. I just kind of went with the flow, and it was great. I come from service-based family. My parents are teachers. My brother's a fireman. Everybody else in my family's a teacher. So everybody's in public service. So it was easy. And then now I get to this position where I have people in our survey that say, because we asked them, do you consider yourself on the same plane with the culture of the sheriff's office? And some people, and it's not a lot, but some people said, well, I don't really know what the culture is. And I was almost offended by that, right? I'm like, how do you not know these things? Through some discussion with you, it did dawn on me a bit of, okay, wait a minute. Not everyone has been here for 23 years. Some people have been here less than a year. Some people, even if you've been here a year or a little more. So maybe they don't quite grasp it yet. We also deal with it different generations than when I was growing up of like, I really want to see you write it down to tell us what you think. And I'm, being ignorant of everyone knows what I think, right? I talk about stuff, and so they all know what I think. And I had to kind of think outside my brain a little bit to say, yeah, that's not the case. The different generations, people from different places, and different perspectives that want to know, well, Sheriff, you tell me what it is, and then I can make a decision. But now, honestly, I believe those people really are working and living the culture of the sheriff's office. They just probably don't even know it, right? We have really great people, and you make it through our hiring process, you're probably ripe for the culture here. But yeah, I have realized that and have recently written it down. Yeah, I had to have that realization of, all right, you know what? People do need to hear what that is. And I have spoken in front of some groups of employees since that and made sure, like, let me tell you what I think it is. And quite frankly, all those people tend to agree. They just don't realize, like, okay, well, I just want to hear him say it.
Well, they want to hear you say it. They want to hear other people say it. They want to see it, And I think every leader challenges. I mean, I've been going through this myself too, Sheriff. So like we're all learning together. Whereas like I've been abundantly clear. I must have said this 28 different times, 5 different ways in multiple forms. I'm like, how is that not clear yet? And because one of the key roles of a leader is to provide clarity. And so there's a point where you're like, okay, like you have to be living under a rock to not get this. And then that gets frustrating. Then we take it personal, and then our brains get all jacked up in it. But to be able to say like, okay, you know, yes, have I said it verbally? Have I done it visually? Have I demonstrated kinesthetically? Are other people echoing that same saying? And then ask them, what do you think it is? And have them repeat it back. Like, the level of intentional effort it takes to truly be in alignment on a thing as squishy as cultural expectations takes way more effort than I think any leader has ever given it credit. And I think it just all goes back to, you just can't take things for granted. The important things are important, and they're usually harder than you think, but they also pay more dividends and make your life easier than you realize. And I think if we get that, then we're like, cool, you need it 33 times. I'll do it 33 times.
Yeah. And you also do, in an agency our size, you have 850 people. And again, you start living in your own brain of, well, everybody knows what I'm thinking. When in fact, it's impossible for me to see every employee even in a week's time. I get in front of groups of employees, but there's always a pocket somewhere that doesn't see me very often. And so you have to realize that of like, okay, I need to use our our electronic communication to try and get to some folks as well. But yeah, again, you live in your brain of like, well, how do they not know? Like, well, it's just some don't.
There's, signal loss and even electronic wires. Like you go far enough out on that wire, the electricity that started it ain't the same that ends it. So how do you make sure that you have that fidelity of your communication? So, well, Sheriff, I really appreciate you being so generous with your time. I do personally appreciate living in this community, and I've definitely seen the difference. I don't know if I ever told you, but my dad was military law enforcement, and he did patrol, and then he was the warden of the base prison for a while. And he very much shared the same philosophy that you had. That's what I grew up with. But then, yeah, you don't always see that, as I've moved around the country in different areas. So very grateful for your leadership and your service. Well, thank you again so much for your time today. Some very valuable insights on what it's like to develop a positive relationship with your community, redefining what does customer service look like, and then how do you be intentional and not take for granted the cultural norms that are needed to give you that adaptability. Some great nuggets. Again, very much appreciate all that you do for us and the example you're setting for other law enforcement agencies across the country.
Well, I appreciate that. Again, I have a good team, so I wish I could say I'm out doing all these things all the time, but I'm not. They're doing the work, and I appreciate you and your team. I know you've helped me realize a lot of things in the last year or so since you and I have met. So I really appreciate your group you have.
Thank you for joining us today on the Unleashing Leaders podcast. Subscribe so you don't miss a moment that could be the key to your next breakthrough. Let's stay connected and contribute together by grabbing that @Unleashing Leaders handle on LinkedIn, YouTube, or your favorite network. This is Lee Scott. Keep learning, loving, and leading. Our future and our communities are counting on us.